Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 620. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about boats and beach bars, snorkeling and sugar factories, pirates, and of course, rum, as we go to the Virgin Islands.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. If you didn't listen to the announcement in last week's show, make sure you listen to the end of this show when I have an important announcement for listeners of the show, especially listeners of the iTunes enhanced version. But first, let's talk about the Virgin Islands. I'd like to welcome to the show Captain Shane McClellan from the Sailing Vessel Guiding Light and the svguidinglight.com website. Now, do I call you Shane or Captain Shane? Which would you prefer here?
Oh, Shane is fine.
Okay, excellent. And you have come to talk to us about the Virgin Islands. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
Now, first of all, this is going to be one that's a little weird because when I say the Virgin Islands, what country am I talking about?
When you say the Virgin Islands, you are talking about two different countries, the U.S. and the British, but the U.S.-owned portion is actually divided into the U.S. Virgin Islands and what we call the Spanish Virgin Islands, which are simply the islands east of Puerto Rico, and they're owned by Puerto Rico.
Excellent. And why should somebody go to the Virgin Islands? Let's start with that.
Oh, why not go to the Virgin Islands? I mean, as long as you like beaches, sun, snorkeling, water, some of them pretty darn famous bars, it's just got everything you could want, including some wonderful hiking over on St. John. Just anything you want, I could probably find for you in the Virgin Islands.
Excellent. And we have done a couple different shows on this destination, but it's been a while. I think the most recent one we did was on Vieques, on the Spanish Virgin Islands, but just on that island. And then we've done another show on the Virgin Islands, the British and the U.S. And then way, way back in the archives, you will find a show about an experience that I did for my 40th birthday. It was a dream trip, and that was a sailing ship, a larger sailing vessel than you are taking around, Shane, but the old Windjammer Barefoot Cruise sailing ship, which was a 104-passenger boat that we did through all three of those areas. And I say back when I was 40, that's been a few years ago, but there is an episode way back in the archives of Amateur Traveler about that trip. What kind of itinerary do you recommend for the Virgin Islands?
Well, my experience, and I've been in the Virgin Islands for the last 7 years running charters. I run mine on a 41-foot catamaran, but I'm basically, when I talk about charters, we're talking anything between 40 and 60-foot crewed or bareboat where you are in charge of the boat yourself. So we're talking basically a week where you do a loop around the British Virgin Islands, or you could do, which I prefer even more because of how it's nature-oriented, but go on a loop around St. John.
Okay. And if someone has been in the Virgin Islands, but they were there on their big boat cruise, and I say big boat cruise just to distinguish from a small boat cruises, which you're talking about, they've already done this, so they don't need to listen to what you're talking about. It's going to be exactly the same, right?
Oh, of course, exactly the same. No, the cruise ships are great and they're wonderful in the islands. And if you take one, when let's say you go to Tortola,
Hmm.
you are going to have time to go to one destination, and it's going to be a wonderful destination. But by doing what we're talking about today, you're going to be able to do all of these over a week, and you'll go one day here, one day there, and you'll be able to get so much more of an experience of the Virgin Islands, the BVI, or St. John, whatever it is, versus the cruise ship. You're kind of rushed to go get that one thing you're going to do. Let's say in the BVI, it's the Bass is the most popular.
Right.
You're rushing to get there. You're going through real quick, following grandma and everybody else, and then you're rushing back. Where a lot of them, if you come with me, I have my own special route through the Bass, and most of my fellow captains have their own special little feature in the Bass that they do. And it really just shows you something away from just doing a conga line through it, essentially, which is what happens when the cruise ships are in.
Well, and I suspect, and we'll get to this, but you're probably going to take us to some places too that a big boat can't go. So where are you going to take us?
Let's start with the British Virgin Islands. And a typical trip, we usually start going to Norman Island. And from there, we skip Peter Island, although that's going to change, and we can talk about that in a minute why. But we skip Peter and we go to Cooper, which is very popular. From there, we go up to Virgin Gorda. We do the Bass at the southern end, and we do the North Sound up at the north end, and that's where your Bitter End, your Saba, those type of places are. And then from there, we sail out to Anegada, which is completely different than all the other Virgin Islands. And then we have a long, relaxing sail back over to Jost Van Dyke, and we party at Foxy's and Soggy Dollar. That's usually about a week, and we end up back in St. Thomas and drop you off.
Excellent. Okay, now let's go through that a little slower. You're starting us in where? Are we in Road Town or?
Typically, I pick up in Red Hook at the east end of St. Thomas because people can fly into St. Thomas a lot cheaper than they can the BVI.
Oh, well, that makes sense. Sure.
And I'm going to say typically, and this is probably 60% of my guests that want to do this, they want to do the BVI, and then we can come back and talk about some other alternative routes. But we'll spend a night on the north side of St. John. I really like Waterlemon Key. Most of the time people are getting in, and by the time they get to the boat, it's 2:30, 3 o'clock. We spend an hour to get over there. They've been traveling all day, and we're there by 4. Everybody can jump in the water and just relax. They don't even necessarily snorkel. They just want to decompress. So they jump in the water. We have a cocktail for the evening, and I cook dinner, and it's just a very relaxing night to let everybody relax from traveling.
Okay. And then just to expand on that a little bit. So we flew into St. Thomas to Charlotte Amalie. And again, this is one of the big cruise ship ports. And so that's why the flights are cheaper. There are a lot of people coming to St. Thomas. But you're then immediately taking off and heading over to St. John, the other major island, well, the other of 2 major islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And that one being mostly covered by National Park.
Correct. 2/3 of National Park. And the bay that we're at, the Waterlemon Key, is really cool because you can do about a mile. I don't even call it a hike because it's just a flat trail, but a mile walk, and I can give them a historic tour through Annenberg Sugar Factory, which is a ruins. It was the most successful sugar factory, had the largest windmill. So you have that right there. You've got a garrison up the hill. You have what we call a great house, and Americans would know it more as a plantation home. And you have that up the hill. You have this little island that is called Waterlemon Key, thus the name of that bay. And snorkeling around it is some of the best examples of soft corals I can show people. So even just in this first bay, there's so much that people can do, and they usually don't get to all of it because they're like, wow, this is great, but we want to see more stuff. So it's just a fantastic place to start off a charter.
Okay. And when you talk about Waterlemon Key, and I always have trouble pronouncing that word because it's spelled C-A-Y, we're talking about a place that isn't as accessible not by boat. There's not the major road that goes there as there is for Trunk Bay, for instance, where if I'm on an excursion from a cruise ship, I'm probably going to head there because the buses go there.
Correct. If you want to get to Waterlemon by road, you would have to park at Annenberg Sugar Factory and walk 0.8 to 1 mile to get over to the beach.
Got it. Okay, so we're already off the beaten path of the major tourism at that point.
Correct.
Excellent. And then where would you head us the next day?
Well, the next day, unfortunately, we got to take care of red tape and bureaucracy to start off with. So we have to go over to Soper's Hole to check into the British Virgin Islands, because it's not its own country, but it is part of the Britain, and we're part of the U.S. So you have to check into the British Virgin Islands. And that's not terribly exciting. But after that, we do get to go to Norman Island, which has some wonderful snorkeling with the Indians, which are essentially 4 rocks that stick up out of the water. One side is 10 to 15 feet deep. The other side drops 50 feet straight down. So it's very, very popular. I'd call it the #1 snorkel site in the British Virgin Islands, but it's worthy of that description. It's beautiful, colorful, and just wonderful.
Now, last time I was on Norman Island, I think there was one building there. I don't know if that has changed over the years.
Well, let me get to that. The other snorkel spot is the caves.
Yeah.
And besides, there are 3 caves that you can actually swim into, and you're not going underwater. They're above water, and you swim in. But what is fun historically is the Norman Island was the inspiration for the book Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And those caves are the caves in the book. It's very loosely based on the island, but what we have is that it's based on that island.
No, we should say there's at least 3 different stories that I know of where Treasure Island is based on. So
Right.
This is the story they tell, at least in the BVIs.
This is what we tell in the BVI, since we are right there, and everybody seems to eat it up. And it seems to make the most sense. If you look at the map in the book, it's not perfect, but things line up pretty good. So
Let's take a break here and hear from our sponsor. This episode of Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Vivid Seats. Vivid Seats is an online event ticket marketplace. Whether you're traveling across the globe or across town, Vivid Seats can help you get tickets to a local concert, show, or sporting event. If you're going to New York, get tickets to a Broadway show. Have plans to visit Chicago? See historic Wrigley Field. Wherever your travels take you, Vivid Seats can help you fill up your itinerary with experiences you'll remember long after you return home. And just for listeners of Amateur Traveler, you can get 10% off your first ticket purchase at Vivid Seats using the promo code TRAVEL. That's it, just travel. So as you plan your next adventure, go to vividseats.com or download the app and enter the promo code TRAVEL to save 10% on your first order, whether it's a concert, theater, or sporting event. This offer is good to the end of August 2018, and thanks to Vivid Seats for sponsoring Amateur Traveler.
Going back to your question, on the beach you have Pirate's Bite, which is now more than one building.
Okay.
It is 2 separate restaurants, and there's some history there. One of them burned down, and they built the other one, and then they had hurricane damage with the hurricanes, and one was open, and they're rebuilding the other. It's a boutique resort, and I'm not sure how many rooms, but let's say anywhere between 6 and 12 rooms, so you can actually stay right there. And then the other thing that Norman Island has been known for, but will not be from this point forward, was the Willie T, which is a floating bar.
Okay.
And I don't know if you heard of that one.
I vaguely, but I don't know what's happening to Willie T.
Okay. Well, what it is, it's I want to say about 125-foot steel boat, and it's got a kitchen, it's got a bar, it's got a top level. People jump off of it. It's the most rambunctious place in the Virgin Islands, and I have seen everything there. Doesn't mean it happens every night, but think Animal House in the BVI, and that's what you're envisioning right here. It sank during the hurricane last year with Hurricane Maria. They built a new one, and the British Virgin Islands government has told them that they have to move it over to Peter Island instead of Norman Island.
Okay. Was there a particular reason they're trying to change the tourism of Norman Island or something?
I'm going to tell you what I have heard through the grapevine. I don't have a definitive answer, but I'm told the private owner of Norman Island simply didn't want it in his bay anymore, even though there's no houses or anything on Norman Island, but he didn't want it there. And I suspect there was a little bit payment on the backside, but he had their seafloor lease not renewed, and so they had to find a new place.
Got it. All right. Anything else we want to do on Norman Island while we're there? I know I've done the hike to the top of the island. Doesn't take all that long. It's not a huge island, but these islands do have a little bit of altitude. There's a little bit of hills on them.
It does, and each of the British Virgin Islands does have some hiking on it. I'm going to admit I don't do a lot of hiking on them. I save my hiking for St. John itself.
Okay.
So you can't go up there. To be honest, by the time you've done what we've talked about, it is midnight and you are worn out. I mean, that's a packed day getting all that in.
Okay.
So the next island, and we're moving eastward, and the one bad part about the Virgin Islands is they are lined up east to west, and the trade winds come directly from the east. So you're either, for the most part, going upwind or downwind. There's not a whole lot of side to side or on the beam type of sailing. But Peter's the next island upwind. It's not terribly developed, which has its advantages. It will have the Willie T, which will make Great Harbor a lot more popular. Before, you could go in there and have a very quiet night. They have Peter Inn Resort, which is very, very high end. And if you're on a boat, we pretty much stay on this side and the resort's right over there, and we don't go mess with them and they don't mess with us type of thing. So from there, you go by and we sail by Dead Chest, which we don't stop on Dead Chest, but there's a fun story where Edward Teach, who's better known as Blackbeard the Pirate, dropped off 15 of his mutinous crew with a cutlass, which is a type of sword, and a bottle of rum. And they couldn't swim back then, but they knew they had to get over to Peter Island about a mile away because there was no water, no animal life, nothing to help survive. Where in Peter, they had just a chance. So they all tried to swim the mile, and they all drowned, and they washed up on the beach right there, and that's still called Dead Man's Bay. And the funny part is most people say, oh, I've never heard this. And I tell them you have actually heard it because you know this song, 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. That song is based on this legend.
Okay. Interesting.
So from there, you sail over, and we have 3 islands that are very, very tiny, even to Virgin Island standards. And they're right next to each other. The first one is Salt Island, and that's where you have the wreck of the Rhone. So any divers out there, that is, if you have one place to dive, you want to do a 2-tank dive there. But a lot of people don't know you can snorkel it. You won't be able to see the bow, but the stern is very interesting. It's in 15 to 40 feet of water, and it's very doable by snorkel. So if it's not too rough, and where it is, it can get rougher than other places. But if it's not too rough, you definitely want to stop there and get a snorkel in.
Okay. And so this is a ship that went down 1867, I think was what I saw, a British mail ship.
You are absolutely correct. And there's different numbers, and there's a whole story to it. But the big crux of the story is somewhere around 300 people went down with it. Only 23 survived, and only one of them was a guest. Because they were trying to escape a hurricane, they lashed all their guests down to the beds, and when the boat went down,
oh my gosh!
So, a lot of interesting history there. And then just 1 mile over is Cooper Island, which is typically where you spend the night. And if you're doing a bareboat, I recommend you get there early because it does fill up very quickly as far as mooring balls, and the anchorage is quite deep outside the mooring field. But it's hard to explain why people love Cooper. Besides, it's got this little boutique resort, and it's got a nice little beach, but just the atmosphere is just intoxicating. And it's just wonderful to hang out on the beach, getting a drink, going to dinner that night. And people just love it. And we spend all afternoon there, and people are just eating it up.
Well, and you have a couple different things to get into there. One is you were talking about hurricanes and crowded anchorages. When is the best time to go to this region?
Well, I would say any time is a good time, but hurricane season is June through the end of November. Okay. The big months are August, September, and October. The most popular times, the busiest times, are going to be between Christmas and spring break. In my opinion, the very best time to come, and this is just me, I think the month of May is great because you still have the wonderful winter weather. Not that it changes that much during the summer, goes up 5 degrees, the humidity doubles, but you have that great weather, but you don't have crowds because winter's over, but school's not out yet.
Right. Okay. Well, and then you mentioned a beautiful island. We haven't really talked about what the Virgin Islands look like. We're not talking about covered with palm trees. For instance,
No.
if that's your picture, you've got the wrong mental picture. Describe to me what Cooper Island, for instance, looks like.
Okay, I'm going to actually describe all the Virgin Islands outside of Anegada,
Okay.
but I want to make sure that the listeners don't, they're beautiful. Don't take what I say it's going to come out not as beautiful as it actually is. So they're volcanic in nature. They're not actual volcanoes, but think upheaval like the Rocky Mountains. So they've been upheaved, and they can get between 2,000 and 3,000 at the tallest ones. So all of them have a peak to them. Very, very dry. So we have a lot more cactus than people think that we're going to have. So you have the hillside, and you just don't do anything on the hillside. It's just, okay, whatever. It's a hillside. It's covered in goats. Let them have it type of thing. But almost every island has beaches, and they're beautiful beaches, beautiful sandy beaches. And sometimes they have palm trees right on the edge, and I can almost guarantee that those are planted.
Sure.
But they still look beautiful. And each little beach in the British Virgin Islands, they tend to have a resort on each of the most perfect beaches.
Okay. And then we're in the Caribbean, so at least when we're away from the Atlantic waters, which we are in most of the places you've been describing, we're talking about relatively calm seas most of the time.
Correct. The British Virgin Islands, all the islands, where you're going to go to them, for the most part, face inward and to the Sir Francis Drake Channel, which basically I've been told to describe it as just a big lake, and you're just sailing on a 15-mile long lake. So you can get some rough water, but nothing like you'll get in the open water.
Right. Well, that's the thing, especially as you're talking about small boat cruising, I think that people need to understand because it is different that way. Where a lot of the waters we're going through are relatively shallow and gorgeous. But yeah, you're right. The islands themselves, a lot of scrub in terms of what you're going to find on it. Not so many palm trees. And again, very dry, surprisingly dry. Excellent.
Surprisingly dry. But where it makes up for that is besides the beaches, all of them just have some wonderful reefs that are very accessible and protected. Unlike other islands that have them on the windward side of the island, these are all protected within the channel. And usually they're all accessible regardless of the weather. But there are a few that you don't want to do if the winds pipe up too much.
Excellent. Yeah, no, good snorkeling. In terms of beaches, you're heading for my favorite beach in the world, so I don't want to slow you down too much here. Anything else you want to say about Cooper Island?
Like I said, there's not a lot there, but there's everything there. That resort just really does it for Cooper, and people love it. And then the next morning, I typically give my guests a choice. We can either get up between 6 and 7 and get going in order to make it to the Bass and be one of the first boats, or have more of a relaxed, don't try to get up at 8 and go, relax and leave at, say, 9 or 10, where that first wave of people are leaving, and you can come in and pick up a mooring ball, because if you're taking a boat, you pretty much have to pick up a day ball there at the Baths.
Okay, so now we're going to translate that in English. When you talk about a mooring ball, first of all, this means you are mooring offshore. We're not mooring at a dock. And so you're on a float that is floating in the water, and there's a limited number of them to limit the number of boats that are here.
Correct.
Okay.
And when I describe a mooring ball, non-boaters, I basically tell them it's a permanent anchor.
Exactly. Okay. And then we've been talking about the baths, and that is what I was referring to in terms of you can find an article on the website that says my favorite beach in the whole world is the baths. What is the attraction of this place?
Perfect question. And I'm going to answer that. First, I'm going to say that of everything I've described, my favorite island is St. John over in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I tell people that with the caveat. I'm like, but the British Virgin Islands has the baths, and there is nothing compared to it in the entire Virgin Islands. And if people want to do the BVI just for the baths, there's nothing wrong with that. I completely get it. So the description I'm going to give you, and you have to have a big imagination, but imagine a pile of rocks, and we're talking rocks the size of houses, and they are piled up on top of each other haphazardly, and you are going to either be all the way underwater in certain spots, but most of the time you'll be in knee-deep water, waist-deep water, or above water, and you're going from the Baths Beach over to Devil's Bay Beach in between these rocks. And you can have the normal trail where all your cruise ship people go. All that can still make this trail, so don't let that stop you. Ropes, ladders, stuff like that. But you're going in between these rocks. And sometimes you're walking on land, sometimes you're on the rocks, sometimes you're in the water. And it's all about exploring and boulder hopping and just having a blast inside these granite boulders.
And when you say inside, when you're there, it looks like a cave. Not that it is a cave technically, because it's a bunch of boulders piled up and you're in crevices under them, but it's basically sea caves in between these two beaches. Both beaches are gorgeous. That's the other thing we should say is if you just went to the beach there, it would still be one of the most beautiful beaches I think in the world. Not a huge beach, but very, very beautiful. But that experience of getting in between them through this path, I think, is what makes it really stand out.
I completely agree with you. And I would say of the two beaches, Devil's Bay is the more beautiful one. Mm-hmm. Although you do have to be careful because if a swell comes in, sometimes the sand is gone for a week or two before it comes back, which
interesting.
Is kind of amazing. And the snorkeling there is fantastic. But by the time I get done taking my guests through my special route, which I spent 7 years, and I add, we can jump off this rock and go under this rock. And so I've kind of added my own little thing. By the time we do that, not only are they worn out, but we have spent almost 3 hours nonstop in the bass. We haven't done the beach hardly at all. We haven't done the snorkeling. It's just been about exploring those rocks. And they are worn out, and they're like, okay, we got to go. We're so tired.
Well, and I would say the snorkeling there was okay. I still like the beach and the caves better. So I understand what you're saying. Because it's relatively deep. For snorkeling, I'm not looking for 20-foot deep water, and a lot of that there in Devil's Bay, as I recall, got fairly deep fairly quick.
Correct.
Excellent. Now, this is one of the islands that we're back in places with supermarkets and more resorts than one and more than just one restaurant on the island. So this is an island that people can go to without doing the charter boat experience, unlike most of the places we have talked about since we left St. John's.
I would agree with you. A lot of the islands, if you want to do the one resort on the island, you could do that. They all tend to be high end. But Virgin Gorda, you're correct. It's one of, I think, 4 islands, Tortola being the main one. But Virgin Gorda has about 1,000 people on, and Spanish Town is the main town. Mm-hmm. And then you have a very tall mountain, and on the other side you have a bunch of resorts that you can get to by road. So yes, you don't have to be on a charter boat to see Virgin Gorda, and you could very easily spend an entire week and love every minute of it on Virgin Gorda.
I agree with you, although I like what you're describing better.
I agree. It gives you a better sampling of all the islands, but let's continue up Virgin Gorda, and there's 2 places I want to describe, or 3 places actually. The first one is a beach, and it's got a little bay, but it's very open. It's called Savannah Beach, and it is, if you like the beach at the Baths, you have got to try Savannah, because I think it might actually become your favorite beach in the entire Caribbean.
I drove past it, but we did not stop there.
Yeah, it's just fantastic, and you have a beautiful beach, and then it just goes sand hill up, a sand dune up, and if you want, you can run down the sand dune, and that's a lot of fun. But if you're going by boat, the caveat is the north swell, which happens during the winter, and those tend to be storms that come off the east coast of America. They push waves into the whole Caribbean, but we're talking the Virgin Islands, about 5 to 6 days after the storm goes through. Okay. So we never see the storm, but we get these waves, and they can be 5-foot waves, and I've seen up to 20-foot waves. And if you get a swell, you want to be careful on any beach that's on the north side of an island, which Savannah Beach is one of those. So I tend to only really talk about it during the summer months because you don't have the north swell.
Okay, well, that makes sense because we're in one of the least sheltered spots that you have talked about so far. We've been kind of in that inland passage south of Tortola.
More east of Tortola.
Right.
That point.
Yep.
And then from there, you have a group of islands called the Dogs. There's 6 of them. Nothing's there. They're very tiny, but they have some beautiful snorkeling. They've got a little pocket beach here and there. So if you want a little day trip on the charter boat. You can't get it if you come on a cruise ship. You won't be able to get there. But take your boat over there for an hour lunch stop for snorkeling or a little beach. So the dogs are really fun. Again, be careful of the north swell and just pay attention. And then from there, we're going, and you also have, if you want to do a dive, Sir Richard Branson, which most of us know, he owns an island and is very big since the 70s in the British Virgin Islands. And he has sunk a ship right east of Savannah Beach and this big bay area. And he actually had them build this huge octopus out of chicken wire or something, and it's basically this big artwork, and they sunk it, and it's supposed to look like the Kraken pulled the ship down into the sea bottom.
And this is all as an artificial reef then as well?
Eventually, I want to say it went down like 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
It went down.
Okay.
So eventually it will become, again, you have to watch that north swell, so it might not have been the best location for it, but that's where they chose to put it. And then from there, we're going to sneak into the North Sound. A sound is more or less an almost enclosed bay. There's like 3 entrances into it. And it's roughly 2 miles by 2 miles. And you have 3 major resorts there being Leverett Bay, Saba Rock, and Bitter End Yacht Club. And then you have 3 or 4 other ones that are more high-end but less known. It's just a wonderful area. Just lots of these resorts that are open. You can go into them and eat at the restaurants, play on the beaches. There's other beaches. There's some snorkeling in there. Personally, I think you could spend 2 or 3 days just in the North Sound and love every minute of it. Now, the one thing I have to say with the hurricanes that happened last year, the Saba Rock and Bitter End are being repaired and rebuilt, so they're not quite open again yet.
Got it. Okay.
From there, the next day, you're going to take off and you're going to go to Anegada, which a lot of people, oh, that's that island that's way out there, way out there. It's like 12 miles. That's it. But that's how close everything is in the Virgin Islands that you think 12 miles is way out there. And it's different than everything else because it's a coral island. So it's very, very flat. I think the highest point's 27 feet above sea level.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All sand. It's beautiful. And it's in the British Virgin Islands. It's probably my second favorite island. I tell people, if you don't like beaches and just hanging out on beaches, it might not be the island for you because that's what it is. It is just one 10-mile long beach, and they have different names. I have no idea why they call this beach that and that beach that, because it's all one continuous beautiful beach on the windward side. Okay.
And the windward in the Virgin Islands is the north, but is the northwest or northeast?
It would be the east side is the windward. In this case, though, we're talking the northeast because this island kind of goes northwest to southeast.
Got it. Okay.
And they have some very nice low-end resorts. And my favorite is Neptune's Treasure, but Anegada Reef is popular. The Wonky Dog, there's a bunch of them. But if you go there, restaurants in the Virgin Islands are expensive, but you have to go for the Anegada lobster dinner. Very traditional. It's what everybody does. It's where all the lobsters for the whole BVI comes from is Anegada, and they're just known for that dinner.
Okay.
And that is another one of the islands that is populated. I want to say 200 to 300 native population. There is a ferry that goes out there. It might be tough to do during a one-day stop on a cruise ship, but if you have any listeners that go to the islands but don't necessarily do a boat, you could go out in a ferry and spend a couple of days and then bring the ferry back to Tortola.
Okay.
The one bad part about going to Anegada, if you're in a 1-week program, is you're going to be doing about a 5-hour sail, and it's going to be mostly downwind, so it's nice and calm and relaxing. But you're going to Joost van Dyke, which was named after a Dutch pirate. And normally I stop at Guana Island, and people snorkel Monkey Point, and they love it there. Lots of minnows. There used to be a lot of diving pelicans. I haven't seen that as much in the last 2 years. But when they do dive, it is like World War II bombers coming down. It's just phenomenal watching them hit the water. And that tends to be about a halfway mark, so we do lunch there, and then we go over to Joost van Dyke. And Joost Van Dyke is another one that has a population of, I want to say, between 300 and 500 people. Lots of things to do. Start off with, just off island is Sandy Key and another little sand spit called Sandy Spit. It's just beautiful beach that is out there, and you just go. It's very remote, although there's going to be other boats there. Captains have one or the other that they like. It's no reason that they choose one or the other, but I personally like Sandy Key. Beautiful beach, lots of fun, and there's a small little nature trail, I would say maybe a quarter mile long, and you just go around the island. You go up 100-foot cliff type of thing and come back around. And then during the winter, we have the bubbly pool, which is in not Little Bay, but it's at Little Joost Van Dyke.
Okay.
And so it's on the east side of the big Joost Van Dyke. And you go and you have to walk over to about a quarter mile. And it's hard to describe, but essentially you have a cliff on the north side. So when you get that north swell coming through, as long as it's not too big, it's okay. But you have the swell hitting these cliffs. Well, there's this one spot that is essentially a V cut into the cliff and has this channel that comes in, and the water comes rushing down this channel and squirts into what I call a reversed bay. And it's very, very small. A couple catamarans will size area. But this wave comes in and you kind of hold on and the water just rushes over you, or if you don't hold on well enough, it pushes you back onto the little beach. And it's just one of those spots, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour. But if the swell is running, it's awesome as long as the swell's not too strong, because it can be dangerous. And then during the summer, don't even go there. It's not even it's a waste of your time because the swell's not running and there's no water getting into it.
Okay.
From there, we're skipping over and we're going into town, which is in Great Harbor. And a lot of people don't play on the beach, but I've had small kids, 5-year-olds, and it's a very protected beach. And it's a great little place to play with kids. And then ashore, the entire shore is lined with bars and restaurants. The two that I prefer to send my guests to, the first one, I tell them to go eat at Corsairs, which is owned by Vinny. He's great food. And then you go over to Foxy's, and you dance and drink the night away. And it's probably one of the 10 most famous bars in the world. And you'll be surprised. You never heard of it. And then all of a sudden you go and you walk down the street of anywhere in America, and all of a sudden you're like, that guy's got a Foxy shirt on. And it's amazing how that everything pops out after you've been there.
Okay.
The final stop, usually we spend the night there, and then the next morning we go one bay over, which is all of about 10 minutes. And we anchor off of the Soggy Dollar, which is another very famous bar, but it's a daytime only type of bar. And it's a beautiful beach. Most of the beaches or the bays in the Virgin Islands drop very deep, very quick. And when I say very deep, we're talking 50 to 80 feet. So it's shallow versus the ocean, but it's still deep for a bay.
Right.
Where White Bay is 10 feet deep, and it goes out for a quarter mile or something. So you can get a lot of boats in there. So everybody's anchoring in this beautiful sand, 10 feet deep. You've got the beach right there. And the bar is called the Soggy Dollar because there's no dock or anything, and you swim ashore, and when you get there you pull out your money and it's soggy dollars and you pay. And they actually have a clothesline, and they pin up the money on the clothesline to dry it.
That's funny. I've heard of it, but I did not know where the name came from. Okay.
And if you've ever heard of the drink called the Painkiller, which is very, very famous in the Virgin Islands, that's the home of the Painkiller. They invented it. And I have no idea when they invented it, but that's where it came from.
Okay, and I don't know the recipe for a painkiller, but without looking it up, I was guessing rum. Rum tends to be the base, and I was correct with that, but I don't remember what else is in it.
It's essentially, and I don't know the exact recipe off the top of my head, but pineapple juice, orange juice, cream of coconut, and
twist
rum.
on the pina colada, it says. So
exactly.
Okay. Excellent. This is an area where if you don't like rum, that tends to be the default drink, if my experience is any indication.
Well, just like Mexico is known for tequila.
Exactly.
The Caribbean is known for rum, and it all comes from the early to mid 1800s when everything was sugar factories and sugar plantations.
Interesting. So now that's the last stop, as I recall, and then you're going to wind up back on St. Thomas.
I am going to wind up back on St. Thomas. I do have one other spot that some boats kind of go to that and skip somewhere else, but that's King Garden Bay on Tortola. It's on the north side. If you go on a cruise ship, it's extremely easy to get to, and it's just a perfect beach, an entire bay, I'd say a half moon-shaped bay, and it has bars and restaurants all along the beach, little shops, and just a great place to hang out for the day.
Excellent. So you mentioned way early on that people can do a bareboat, or they can, as we talk about the small boat experience, or they can charter a boat with a captain. For people who are not sailors like me, what are your recommendations before they plan a trip like this?
If you are a sailor, a lot of sailors
Well, that was
want
going
to
to be my next question. So,
yeah,
so
a
for
lot
the
of sailors
non-sailors
want
first.
to do the bareboat because they want to be quote unquote captain their own boat, and I get it. They want the experience. I did it before I became a professional captain. I understand that. At the same time, those same people might want to look at the very least, hiring a captain or doing a captain only like I offer, where you get the local experience where they say, that's not bad, but why don't we try this and go here and that type of thing. And you get
captain
that
only versus captain and a crew member?
Correct. And if you're going to do a crew to charter versus a bareboat, you can do captain only, which you have myself doing that and a few others. There's not a lot of us doing it. And essentially what it means is you get just the captain in the boat. You pay for all the expenses. So whatever alcohol, if you're not a huge drinker, it might be the way to go because you're not paying for the all-inclusive.
Got it.
But that's what the captain only is, although a lot of us throw in extra services. I do cook some dinners and make drinks of the day and pick up provisions for you, that type of thing. But the more popular thing is the all-inclusive, which is exactly what the name says. You get on the boat and everything's paid for, all your drinks, all your food, but it is way more expensive is the other side of it. And you get a captain and a chef. Unless you get on the like a 60-foot boat, you may get a third or fourth person, but typically it's a two-person crew. They tend to be boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wives.
Okay. And
the chefs are, my props to them because they are working their tails off. They put out 3 hot meals a day, usually a snack. And, it's pretty much they clean up from one meal and they're starting to prep for the next meal.
Okay.
So those are your 2 options if you want to do a boat, if you don't want to be your own captain.
Now, if you are a sailor and you did want to do bareboat, meaning you don't have the captain at all, how would you even know where to go? Are there guides that you would use to determine where to go if it was your first time in?
If you're a sailor and you're taking these classes, learning how, your first thought is, I'm taking these classes so I can charter a boat in the BVI. So most of them already have an idea, but if you Google bareboat charters in the BVI, you're going to come up with the really big ones, which are the moorings and Sunsail. They're less than 5 boats, very expensive. You have your what we call the second tier companies. I used myself before I bought my boat, Conch Charters, an older boat, but it's going to be cheaper, and they were a wonderful company. And there's got to be 25 different companies that you can bareboat from.
What is going to surprise people about the Virgin Islands?
Oh, the biggest things I think that surprises people is how close everything is together. A lot of my guests kind of joke because they always ask me how far to the next spot. And my answer is always, an hour, hour and a half. And they start joking halfway through the week that it's an hour and a half, except for that one where I said coming from Anegada to Jost Van Dyke.
Right.
But everything is roughly 5 miles apart, 5 miles to there, 5 miles. You don't need any navigation. You just go, I want to go there. And you go.
That's a good point. Yeah, you could usually see your next destination. Well, and the 2 exceptions to that, obviously what we didn't include on this itinerary, you didn't include going down to St. Croix or going over to Vieques, and those are going to be a little longer sail. And
correct.
They're just not grouped with all the other islands that we were talking about, with the one exception, are all very close together.
Correct. So what we've talked about so far is all the British Virgin Islands, and
Yep.
you have St. John right there. And again, if people want to get away from the bars and the crowds, going around St. John, like we talked about, it's 2/3 of a national park.
Right.
So you have these very quiet bays and very beautiful bays, but it's very nature oriented. You may not see a house or a building and three other boats with you type of thing. And I think that's a wonderful trip going around there. Now, if you want to go to St. Croix, like you said, it's a 35-mile sail south of St. Thomas and St. John to get to St. Croix. And I would call that open water. So if you want to get some blue water experience, that's not a bad one. It's not bad sailing because it tends to be beam reach there and back.
Now you're going to need to define that for me.
A beam reach is when the wind hits the side of the boat.
Got it.
So it makes it very easy because it's just one tack down there, one tack. So you don't have to do a bunch of work. You just, once you get going, wait 5 to 8 hours and you show up there. There's more to it than that. But versus if you're trying to go upwind, you're going to have to go in one direction, then go 90 degrees the other, and then back and forth and back in order to get upwind. And then if you want to get over, and I know you've talked a lot about Vieques, but personally, I think Culebra, which is just north of Vieques, to me, that is the primo spot. It's what the Caribbean was 30 years ago, and it has a very Spanish feel to it, and it's wonderful. But either one of those islands to get there, you're talking 20 miles, and it's a downwind sail from St. Thomas to them. And then the bad part is it's a 20-mile upwind where you're just going against the wind and the waves.
Interesting.
But it is worth it. I mean, they are beautiful. I've had times when I've had entire bays to myself for the entire week going around the Spanish Virgin Islands.
Excellent. What should we pack? We're not, this is not big boat cruising, and so we're not bringing our formal dress. We're bringing a swimsuit and a t-shirt and what else?
If people could stop at just that, they would do well. I've actually had guests that have come for second and third times, and they say they still overpacked. We jokingly tell people to lay out the clothes they think they need, lay out the money they need, put half the clothes away, double the money, and they're ready to go. So the big thing people do is they think they need an outfit for every day, and the reality is you're going to be in swimsuit all day. Ladies may have like a thin cover-up type of thing or a sarong on or something, but for the most part, guys and girls, you're in your bikini or in your swimsuits the whole day, and then at night you take a shower and you put on a short and t-shirts and you wear it for 3 hours. Well, there's no reason you can't wear that outfit for 3 or 4 days because it's not getting dirty. That's all you need. That and sunscreen, and you're good to go. That's the basics right there.
I might throw in sunglasses and a hat, but I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, you need way, way less than you think you do when you're chartering a boat.
Anything else we want to tell people before they book their trip to go down to the Virgin Islands?
The biggest thing I would say is the British Virgin Islands are the charter capital of the world, and I get it why everybody wants to go there. But I would urge people to look into St. John and look into the Spanish Virgin Islands, especially if you're not into that bar hopping type of scene, which is what the BVI sometimes can be.
Sure.
And you'll get more away from it. And I've had guests, and I get booked. Sometimes I book myself, and sometimes I get brokers that book me. And the brokers say, you have to take them to the BVI. And then I start talking to the guest and what they want. And I'm like, if you're okay, let's give St. John a try for the week. And by the end of the week, they are like, this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted good snorkeling, some beaches, and nobody else around. So that would be the biggest thing. As wonderful as the BVI is, just give some thoughts for St. John and the Spanish Virgin Islands.
Excellent. Now, as we get to our wrap-up questions, you are standing in the prettiest spot in the Virgin Islands, in your opinion. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
See, that's a tough one because the definition of standing, if we're talking where my boat is, my favorite anchorage in the entire Virgin Islands is on the south side of St. John, and it's called Salt Pond Bay. And it's very well protected, beautiful little beach. It's not really crowded. It's got one longer, one not so long hike. You've got snorkeling. You can paddleboard. So we get there and everybody can go in 7 different directions and we all are in the same bay. And I love being in that bay.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in the Virgin Islands.
Everybody in the St. Thomas has a bumper sticker that says, "You can't make this stuff up." It is amazing. And we joke that St. Thomas is a third world nation with first world prices. And it's just some of the stuff that they get away with there. You're just like, what are you thinking? And every day you never know what you're going to see.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the Virgin Islands in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Perfect cruising grounds.
Excellent. And our guest again has been Captain Shane McClellan. Again, the website is svguidinglight.com. And Shane, if we wanted to send people over to your most interesting post on svguidinglight.com or somewhere else, where are we sending them?
Well, as far as posts, I think they're all interesting. Right now I'm writing about the Grenadines down in the Caribbean because I took a cruise down there. But the thing I'm the most proud of is actually, and you can get through it my website, but it's on YouTube, and it's my travel video series called Aboard the Guiding Light. And some of it's based on the boat, and I've got 17 episodes in the Virgin Islands, Caribbean, but some of it's when I backpacked through Iceland, Kyrgyzstan, Norway, all that. So it's anywhere I've traveled, and I love being a tour guide, and I love making travel videos, and so that's the thing I'm most proud of.
Excellent. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Shane, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the Virgin Islands.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
In news of the community, as I mentioned last week, there is going to be a change in the Amateur Traveler, and that involves the iTunes enhanced version. Now, most of you don't use that version, or at least you use that version, but you don't look at the pictures and links, is what you tell me in surveys. And so we're changing the feed that everybody is getting to be using the MP3 version of the show. We will still be creating the iTunes enhanced version. It will still be free. It's just that you'll have to get it through the website. And so that change will happen very soon now. Just after this goes out, we'll probably wait another week and then we'll make that change. So did want to let you know that. Still available, still free, but you will be switched to the MP3 version. And the reason for that is I'm trying to do some changes to see if we can make the show pay for itself, because it barely breaks even at this point. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.